Hello, and welcome to the second Power Hour of our 7-part Power Hour series in 2023. My name is Matthew Manners, if you don't know who I am already. I'm the founder and CEO of the Inspiring Workplaces Group, and we love bringing these free learning events to you, and hopefully spark some ideas that you can take back into your workplace. They do say that you learn something every day, and after about doing 100 plus hours on this platform, doing these types of events for our community, I've just discovered the mirror image switch that makes me able to see what I think I look like rather than the reverse, which has been annoying me for 100 plus hours for the past 3.5 years. So that's the one thing I've learned today. I can't wait to learn a lot more during this session. The title of the session is People First, a holistic look at driving your wellbeing strategy. People First policies prioritize the well-being, happiness, and job satisfaction of employees over corporate goals and profits. By putting people first, organizations attract and retain top talent, increase their productivity, and foster a positive workplace culture. Ultimately, People First policies benefit both the employees and the organization, and it results in better business outcomes and a more inspired workforce. As always, we have a variety of different storytellers in the Power Hour format. They come from around the world to give their own take for 10 to 12 minutes, before coming back together as a group conversation where you can ask your questions and I'll raise mine, and then we'll have some of their own for each other. Our storytellers today are Joe Newman, Wellbeing Advisor at the Independent Office of Police Conduct, Anna Rasmussen, CEO and founder of Open Blend, and Gethin Nadin, Chief Innovation Officer at Benefex. Before we get going, though, I just want to say thank you very much to our headline partner for this Power Hour, Open Blend, and highly recommend you go check them out. Also to our annual partners, who should be going across the bottom of the screen right now. Quite seriously, without their support, we couldn't make our community content and these events free to the world. So thank you very much for your support. So without further ado, let's get to our first storyteller. Joe Newman, as I said, Wellbeing Advisor, Independent Officer for Police Conduct, and very importantly, a Wellbeing Warrioress. And I'm sure she'll fill you in on what exactly that means. In March 2022, Joe won this Breaking the Silence category at the 2021 Great British Workplace Wellbeing Awards. So really is a passionate advocate of wellbeing and knows what she's talking about. And what she's going to talk to us about today is grassroots workplace wellbeing. Joe also spoke at our intimate Inspire London event at the beginning of the year, and for want of a better word, was an inspiring storyteller. So without further ado, please welcome Joe. Hello.
Hello. Thank you, Matt.
How are you doing?
Very nice introduction.
Well, I'm glad. Well, like I said, people aren't here to listen to me, they're here to listen to you, so I will hand you over.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm not going to talk about me. I am the Wellbeing Advisor at the Independent Office for Police Conduct. And just very briefly, that's the independent body that oversees police complaints across England and Wales, not the whole of the UK. So the most serious and contentious police complaints are forwarded to the IOPC, and some are automatically referred to the IOPC because of their seriousness. So arguably an inherently stressful working environment, a lot of public scrutiny. The outcome is massively important, sometimes contentious. And an awful lot of our staff are exposed to what is quite distressing material on a regular basis. We've got just over 1,000 staff across 6 different offices in England and Wales, and hybrid working is the current working model. So the reason I decided to call this grassroots workplace wellbeing, I kind of was inspired because I was at the Health and Wellbeing at Work convention at the NEC in Birmingham in March for 2 days, where there was just a multitude of speakers and all sorts of things happening, quite sort of frenetic, and everyone's running from room to room, and lots of brilliant speakers, highly accomplished, far better qualified than me academically. And whilst everything was brilliantly interesting, and there's the odd snippets and references to reports or studies that you can be directed to, it did make me wonder if somebody was there hoping to embark or was just starting on their workplace wellbeing career, actually how useful it would have been. And it reminded me of the days when I was a fitness instructor, and I used to go to these fitness conventions, and like the best in the industry would do demonstration classes, and we'd all take part as fitness instructors. And yet we were, of course we could follow the routines, but they were so convoluted and brilliantly complex that actually they weren't that much use to us when we came back to our classes in the local church halls. And it reminded me of that a little bit. And please don't think I've got a downer on these conventions. That's not what I'm saying, but I just thought I'd bring it back to basics. And so I thought I'd share the story about what happened when I joined the IOPC. So I only joined in September last year. And of course, you go through that, like mountain to climb when you start a new role. You're trying to understand what the organisation is and who's who and all the rest of it, how you get into all the different systems and software. And then when I got over that mountain, I obviously tried to sort of do my homework and get a recce of where we were at with wellbeing at the organisation. And so the sorts of things I did were, I scrutinised the staff survey results from last year prior to me starting. It's quite a long survey, and only a small section of it is around wellbeing, but obviously I interrogated those, and they showed me that work-related stress was prevalent across the organisation, which is typical of all organisations, sadly. And it also showed me that knowledge of, awareness of, and engagement with the wellbeing resources already on offer was actually quite poor. Again, that can be quite typical of workplaces. So that's what the staff survey showed me. The sickness absence data showed me that the biggest cause of sickness absence was mental ill health. The occupational health data showed me that the biggest cause for referrals was mental ill health. The EAP data showed me that the biggest cause for calls to the EAP helpline was mental ill health. And I also made a point of attending meetings done by some of our staff networks and committees. So the Menopause Committee and the Enable Network, for example, promotes the interests of our disabled employees, and all sorts of different networks. I made a point of making sure I went to those and heard what was going on, and union meetings. And I reached out to the suppliers of our wellbeing offerings. I, had a really good conversations with our occupational health provider and our EAP provider to make sure that I absolutely understood what all these offerings were myself, so that I could relay that accurately to our staff. So that's what I was sort of gleaning. And what I saw was that the IOPC was definitely on its wellbeing journey, and it had this sort of bit of a disparate range of wellbeing offerings, which were and are valid, but underused. And that but probably the focus was more on secondary and tertiary interventions as opposed to primary wellbeing interventions, and getting more proactive and preventative is something that I've been talking about all the time since I started. The one thing the staff survey didn't show, and I voiced this, so hopefully it will do in the next survey, although the staff survey showed that work-related stress was prevalent, there were no questions to help us identify what the root causes might be. So I've been unable as yet to create any targeted actions around that. However, because of what I was seeing from the data, because of what I was seeing anecdotally and hearing, what was apparent was that the wellbeing culture wasn't exactly permeating the organisation. It was a bit like, here was the organisation, and then the wellbeing was this like little bit that sat on the side. There is only one wellbeing advisor, incidentally, so it is me. But it didn't seem to be permeating the organisation. And there seemed to be generally not great mental health literacy. As I said, quite poor awareness and engagement of the wellbeing offerings in place. So some of the things that I've been doing are, I've started a wellbeing roadshow, and that has just been massively successful and impactful. I'm not having to advertise or promote it. So I've been going all around the country to different offices, different teams. Sometimes it's a whole department, sometimes 6 people, sometimes 60, and delivering a wellbeing roadshow. And of course, I do talk about stress, and we talk about signs and symptoms. And then I make sure I really explain exactly what the wellbeing offerings mean and how to access them. So, for example, because both our occupational health and our EAP provider come from the same company, a lot of people did not understand the difference between them. They didn't understand that the EAP is wholly confidential and anonymous. They weren't aware of that. And calling that EAP helpline can give people access to 6 free counselling sessions, which can be extended. So it was a crying shame that was massively underused. So that's one example. I also talk in my roadshow about burnout and presenteeism and how we can help prevent those things, and especially how there is no silver bullet here. A lot of it is about the intangible stuff like organizational culture and team culture and line manager behaviors and line managers being good role models and all of that sort of stuff. And then the other thing I cover in my workshop, which I'll come on to in a minute, is the nature of the distressing materials that an awful lot of our staff are exposed to, which of course is a specific psychosocial hazard in our workplace. And I don't think it had ever really been talked about in those terms. There'd never been any specific actions around this. So what the Wellbeing Roadshow has given me is it's enabled me to really start to have a presence across the organisation. It's been very well received. People feed back to me that it's apparent that I'm authentic, I'm passionate, I'm practical, I'm not floating around on a pink fluffy cloud. And quite often what happens as well is if there are team leaders or senior managers there, at some point during the sort of workshop, roadshow, they will stand up and affirm the messages that I'm giving, which is brilliant because then the workforce are hearing it from their leaders. And I know that as a consequence of the workshops I've been doing, and it's my mission to do the whole workforce, we've had people who have subsequently spoken to their line manager and said they realised that they can ask for help. We've had people reach out to the EAP. There's a team that have set up a breathworks group, and every week for 15 minutes they go into a quiet room in the office and do breathworks, and all sorts of things like that. So they've been very impactful, and this has helped me to build credibility, as a consequence of which I've been invited to speak on line manager calls, which are anything from team leaders to the general director. I've been invited to present to the people and culture committee, who are senior managers and non-exec directors. So I've been getting an awful lot of visibility. People know who I am. They know I'm accessible. They know I'm approachable. They know what I'm about. They know that I'm not trying to convince everybody that if they just do yoga and eat fruit, we'll all be okay. They know that's not what I'm about. They know that I want us to get proactive and preventative so that we stay safe and we stay well and we keep people in work. So I think that's something that has really made a big difference. So as a wellbeing advisor, I would say get out there, get in amongst everybody, and just and show people what it is you're about, who you are, and what it is you're trying to achieve for them, what your values are, what your drivers are. And then I presume I'll get interrupted. I didn't look at the time when I started. I'm sorry. In terms of the distressing materials, how I've been able to make progress with this is I've told everybody from staff to, the top managers and leaders, we need to think of distressing materials in our workplace as a hazard, in the same way that scaffolders who work at height have a hazard working at height. And of course, no construction site would think it was acceptable to say, well, we've got that risk, so we'll just get a couple of extra first aid kits in case they fall off. No, of course not. They have to have preventative steps in place. They can't remove the risk. They have to minimize it by putting proactive, preventative measures in place to keep that scaffolder safe. And that's exactly what the message I've been delivering across our workforce. We can't remove this risk. There's a risk that people could have a clinical traumatic response to the repeated exposure to this type of material, but we can put things in place that are proactive and preventative and help prevent them going on to have a traumatic response. So that's a big driver of mine as well. So if somebody was in a workplace, as well as looking at all those things like, is there any residual stigma around mental health, and what's the mental health literacy of the workforce like, what's the engagement with your wellbeing offerings like, if it's poor, why is that? You need to also look at any specific psychosocial hazards in your workplace, and in mine, exposure to distressing materials is one of those. And we've now, because of the nature of the organisation, I've also collaborated with a focus group with representation from across the organisation, with senior leaders, with the staff council, with the union. Everybody's on board. Everybody wants me to push forward with these next actions. And then the other thing I would say is I didn't have any specific expertise in PTSD or distressing materials before I got this role, but I just started researching and found the various reports and studies that have been done by the College of Policing and the Armed Forces and for social workers, and read all those documents. And I reached out to experts on LinkedIn and said, could we have a meeting? I'd love to discuss with you what I'm thinking need to be my next steps. Those people gave me their time. So that gave me confidence when I was then presenting to the organisation that I was on the right path. It wasn't just Joe's random ideas, but there was some validity in this. So that's what I would say. You've got to get your basics in place, which is that mental health literacy, the culture, no stigma, good awareness and usage of the wellbeing offerings that are there. Then you've got your specific psychosocial hazards, which are depending on the workplace. And then, of course, we've got line managers. Anyone that's heard me speak before will know that I've got a real bee in my bonnet that every year we, the CIPD and other organisations, survey the workforce across the UK. And surprise, surprise, the same two things are the top two causes of work-related stress, which are demands and workload and line manager relations. Now, if I join the organisation in September, I'm not going to be able to overturn those things yet. I've got to build my credibility and do my groundwork, and that's what I'm doing now. But I have created a live wellbeing session, which all new line managers have half a day's training with me, as do all the new investigators. And I'm currently working with a colleague so that all new starters have a wellbeing induction. So then everybody in the organisation will have a level of literacy and understanding and awareness of the resources, and will start to think about distressing materials and how they can protect themselves. Sorry, Matt, can you just drop in the chat how long I've got?
Hello, I think that's it. Yeah, I know. I'm loving the chat, and I think we'll continue the conversation in about 25 minutes time. So,
okay.
Thank you so much, and that's so many building blocks and stepping stones and direction points for people who wanted to build a wellbeing strategy and how to get people on side. So we're looking forward to talking about that more in about 20 minutes. So thank you so much, Joe. Thank you, Joe. We obviously would like to keep things short and punchy in these power hours, and without further ado, so I don't eat into this person's time, welcome Anna Rasmussen, CEO and founder of Open Blend. As a former executive leadership coach, Anna is extremely passionate about helping others to reach their full potential through regular, meaningful performance conversations. And Anna will be speaking on specifically the importance of the manager in conversations around well-being. So she will be sharing how upskilling managers through your well-being strategy is essential to driving high performance. So please welcome Anna to the Power Hour. Hello.
Hi, Matt. Hello.
Nice to see you. And without further ado, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. Well, hello, everybody. As Matt said, my name is Anna Rasmussen. I'm the founder and CEO of OpenBlend. OpenBlend is performance management software with a twist. So rather than just focusing on performance, we support conversations around all the aspects that underpin performance as well, such as well-being, motivation, recognition, development, and of course, goals and reviews as well. So we work with organisations such as Gymshark, Dr. Martens, Saatchi, Prince's Trust, and we support all of them to drive these high-performing cultures whilst recognising the holistic side of the individual as well. So my background, as Matt mentioned, is coaching. I've been a leadership development coach for 16 years. OpenBlend was born from two problems that I saw about 10 years ago. Firstly, before OpenBlend, I used to go into all different types of organizations and train groups of people managers how to use coaching to drive the performance of their teams. And these problems I saw, actually there's three problems I'll touch on. Three problems that I saw in those times. Firstly, is that managers are having to have broader conversations than so employees have an expectation that the conversation needs to be broader. It's not just about performance, it's about their well-being, around their motivation. And actually managers weren't really equipped to be having those broader conversations. That's one problem I saw. The second problem I saw is that pretty much every manager, when they left the training room, would say, Anna, that was fantastic content, I loved it, have you got something I can use on the job? So actually in that moment, managers were crying out for something to prop them up in there. And the other thing, which was very reassuring, is that I would say about 99% of managers that I have come across in my career have really positive intent. So they want to do a really good job. So I am here to talk about exactly that. So supporting managers to have ongoing conversations that touch on well-being. So a key component to high performance. So what I also hope to share, just to support what Joe was saying there as well, is my passion for promoting preventative tactics. This is not about a crisis response. This is about preventative tactics. And I hope that my passion for that comes across as well. So what I wanted to do first is set the scene with some data. And there's no shortage of data in wellbeing in the workplace. But there's three kind of levelers, grounding stats, and then one which I think provides a huge amount of opportunity for us. So according to the World Health Organization, post-COVID is triggered a 25% increase in anxiety. Okay, big macro event. We can't do anything about the increase in anxiety outside. Sadly, only 14% of employees are comfortable talking to their managers about stress, which I think is heartbreaking. Even as worrying is that 69% of managers are uncomfortable communicating with their employees, which is very worrying. And the one where I see a lot of opportunity is that actually I was really impressed to see that 84% of managers said that the well-being of their employees was their responsibility, which I think shines this huge light of opportunity in there. So what I'm really keen to focus on is the fix. So let's fix that 69% uncomfortable communicating with their employees. Let's increase the number of employees that feel comfortable to talk about stress so that we can deal with the reality that anxiety is on the rise. Okay, so how do we do this? So I'm going to just talk about three things. So firstly is putting well-being as an item, an agenda item in any and every catch up between an employee and a manager. So just putting it as a regular thing. Second one I want to talk about is building managers' confidence in conversation. So all types of conversations, actually. So goals, motivation, well-being, having difficult conversations, ensuring that managers are confident in having it because it's becoming more and more important. And the third thing I'm going to talk about is creating a culture of continual one-to-ones. So the dialogue, keeping that dialogue going. So the first thing, putting wellbeing on into every single catch up. So wellbeing, a conversation around wellbeing shouldn't be this great big hairy conversation. It should be integrated into every conversation, a constant agenda item that is just part of a catch up between a manager and an employee. And that's how you prevent rather than deal with any situation of crisis. So it isn't this big focus, but it's clear that the one-to-one is the environment to discuss wellbeing, along with performance, along with feedback, along with those lists of tasks that you've got and everything else that is normal to have in a one-to-one. So make it normal, make it consistent. Mental health is a spectrum where we all go backwards and forwards on that, just like our physical health. So integrating it into continual conversations is an absolute must. The second item I want to talk about is building managers' confidence. And so I come from an L&D background, and with the best will in the world, and it hurts me because I spent so much time doing it. But I think there's this horrible stat that 80% of content is lost after 7 days. I actually think that's quite generous if it's not put into practice. Training in a classroom on its own doesn't work. You need to provide managers with a framework they can use. It's what they're all asking when they were leaving the training rooms before. And it's, managers love a framework. We all love a framework. So what framework can you give the managers to use on the job? If they're using a regular framework and they feel more confident in that, that will change their behavior and build their confidence just in every conversation they have. Now, OpenBlend is a piece of software that supports all of this. You don't need to use software. You can promote a framework internally that props managers up in the moment as well, on paper or however you want to do it. So, but we use a couple of frameworks I just want to share with you. So through the software, we support the following, and mimic that, take this, mimic it. We support managers and employees to organize their one-to-ones, make sure that they're in the diary, that there's regular things going, like their regular cadence is going on. I'll talk to you about that a bit more in a second. We support them to prepare for their one-to-one. So if you know that a conversation around wellbeing is coming up, then just do some preparation, do some reading about it, think about some questions that you might ask. So you go in there equipped to have that kind of conversation. Preparing for a conversation just means when you sit down, it's there. What we do is have an agenda setting functionality so that before the session, the agenda gets sent round to both parties. So both parties know what's going to be discussed in there. So you can do your preparation based on what's going to be discussed. The focus of that conversation is the third layer. Make sure you're focusing on the right things at the right time. So pull in different topics. So you might talk about one particular action, one particular objective, one development goal, well-being, a particular motivational driver. So pull different items like that into it so that you've got the right focus. Now, the guide bit is a bit I'd like to talk to you about as well. So we guide people through a conversation. So we use the GROW model, which basically enables them to the manager walks through the GROW model, and that results in action, and that someone's accountable for that action. Because you can talk about well-being, but if there's no action, so talking will help, of course, but you want to see some change. You want to put something in place. But remember, this isn't crisis, this is preventative. So what action is going to be put in place to support that, to move it forward? So in our wellbeing module in the software, but again, you can do this on paper, we look at happiness, confidence, and ability to manage stress, where an individual will score themselves on 3 simple dials, and they score it 0 to 10. So I just wanted to show how simple this is to do this in whatever way you wanted to do it. So let's use the GROW model. So for those of you that don't know, GROW stands for goal, reality, obstacles, way forward. Okay, so let's say a manager says to an employee, let's talk ability to manage stress. What would be your optimum here? What kind, out of 0 to 10, what would be your optimum ability to manage stress? So they might say, actually, optimum would be 10. Great. Okay, so we've got a 10. What's the reality? Where is that now on a scale of 0 to 10? Well, actually, it's at a 5. Okay, so you want to get to a 10, you're now at a 5. Let's have a conversation about the obstacles that are stopping you from getting there. What's in the way? So you're pulling obstacles out in that conversation, stopping them from getting there. And then you need to come up with the actions that counteract those obstacles. So what is the solution against those? So within that, it's really important in a micro and individualized level that a manager understands any triggers an individual has. everyone is different. No two people are the same. One size doesn't fit all. So every manager should know the trigger that an individual has. And this is a really good way of putting that out. And then, so using that framework, so you understand where their optimum is, you understand where they currently are, you've had a conversation around the obstacles that are in the way and hopefully picked up some triggers so you can keep that in the back of your mind. And you've worked out a way that you can then move this forward and create an action. And the most important thing is that you follow up on that action. It works really well. It gives managers armbands in the moment to have a conversation that doesn't need to be scary. It's just a process of how you want to get through. So that's just some tips on how to support managers on the job. It's not about doing it in a classroom. It's about giving them something in the moment. So maybe support it in a classroom, but giving them something to support those conversations in the moment. So then the third and the last one I want to talk about is creating a culture of one-to-ones. So we've got 70 customers and we've rolled out in all of those, every single one of, whilst we believe no two people are the same, no two organizations are the same either. They all start on different stages of that journey to nirvana, if you like. They all want to embed a culture of continual conversations, but you need to start realistically. So look at what you currently do and then increase it a bit and then increase it a bit more. Rome wasn't built in a day. So look at how you're going to encourage those much more regular conversations. At the base of that is a comms plan. What do you expect? Why do you want more continual conversations to take place? I mean, this is a really in-depth piece, but just really high level, a comms plan. How are you going to communicate it? What's in it for people? What's the benefit to them? In my opinion, in every manager job description, the things they're paid to do should be continual one-to-ones with their employees. It is page one. How managers don't have that in so many job descriptions I see is incredible, but they should be measured on that as well. And then they should be measured on it and rewarded on it as well for having those kind of one-to-ones. This is the way on a micro and individualized level to prevent well-being getting into a state of crisis. This is make sure managers are having it. Role model it from the top. So they can see this coming down, and most importantly, give them a structure that makes those conversations valuable as well. Because if it's not valuable and they're not getting stuff out of it, they won't do it. So that kind of comes to the end. What I just wanted to do is that look back at the stats that I shared at the beginning. So we can't change the macro, the fact that COVID has triggered a 25% increase in anxiety, and I think we can all see this in our day-to-day lives. It's on the rise. What we can impact, if you just put those three things or aspects of those three things in there, surely that will mean that more than 14% of employees are comfortable talking to their managers about stress. Surely by putting a few of those things in place, that's going to increase. Surely by putting those things in place, less than 69% of managers are going to say they're uncomfortable communicating with their employees. So they're the two that really bother me, that we need to change. And I genuinely believe that touching on those three aspects that I've just discussed there will positively impact those two data points and really support managers, because if 84% of them saying that well-being of their employees is their responsibility, they know it, they just don't know how to do it. So make it the norm, encourage people to talk about it, and support managers in the moment to make sure that they're comfortable in having those conversations. And there's Matt.
Thank you so much. Amazing. I still don't know how you were able to get it in such a short space of time. I'm very glad that you do. It's so many thought-provoking ideas have come out. So we'll come back in the next 10, 12 minutes. I will tell you AI has popped up in my head there. So to give you some idea you get that's coming up.
Yes, good. I want to talk about that too.
Good. Thank you very much, Anna. See you soon. Thank you. So, two amazing storytellers. We still get one more to come. And what can we say about Gethin, Chief Innovation Officer at Benefex? He's an award-winning psychologist, has been helping some of the world's largest organizations to improve their employee experience and well-being for more than 2 decades. My personal view, he's a friend and an icon in this space, and a frequent writer and speaker on employee experience across amazing titles such as Forbes, The Guardian, HuffPost, Financial Times. He's been named as one of the top influencers by us, Inspiring Workplaces, for multiple years. Finalist for the UK Mental Health Campaigner of the Year. He's a regular keynote speaker, so we're graced with his presence today. And just quickly scanning through that bio, he doesn't mention that he's a best-selling, worldwide renowned author, writing two amazing books to date, and I'm sure more to come. So Gethin will be talking about a journey to a measurable and competitive wellbeing experience. For many employers, they measure the symptoms and not the cause of poor wellbeing. It's something we've been talking about already, being preventative. So rather than continuing to pull people from the wreckage, we should be more focused on why they're crashing in the first place. So in this talk, Gethin will discuss the problems with the common ways to measure wellbeing and how employers can better gauge how their people experience life. Welcome, Gethin.
Thank you very much for having me back. Two great speakers already, and
amazing.
I think I might just replace my bio with icon.
Well, you've got the N for icon behind you, so we'll just pretend you're covering up the ICO. Anyway, I'm eating into your time, and nobody wants that. So over to you, Gethin.
Thank you very much. So I've got a couple of slides to share with you. So we're going to talk very quickly about the journey to a competitive, measurable, and competitive wellbeing experience. We'll touch upon, I think, a few things that have been mentioned by the other speakers already, and that is kind of how do we measure this stuff? When we're looking after employee well-being, when we're hopefully improving people's lives, how do we kind of measure that as an organization? I think Matt's given me a really good introduction, so I will skip through the little bit about me. And I'll just say that, we conducted at Benefex some research last year called Great Expectations. We spoke to around 4,000 employees all around the world to ask them about how their attitude to work has changed. And some of the data that I'll talk about today is from that. So you can download that from hellobenefex.com. But I think what's pretty obvious is that well-being has continued to dominate that employee experience. So when I wrote my first book, that was about the employee experience, and there were these themes coming through of how we need to take better care of employees at work and the benefit of doing so. And by the time we got to my second book, we're technically 2.5, it was really just about the employee well-being being so dominating the experience that the employee experience, in my view now, is employee well-being. And again, some of the things you've already heard today are showing how many of those touch points are well-being. They used to be considered part of the employee experience support engagement. And with all the research that I've been doing over the last couple of years, even before the pandemic, we know that employees' expectations over how the employer should support their well-being were rapidly increasing. Post-pandemic, the mental health impact of the crisis, already mentioned today, that fueled a much stronger desire to work for an organization that prioritizes employee well-being. And last year and this year, the cost of living crisis has again put a huge strain on employees' lives and has further deepened that employees' expectations around how an employer should support their lives, their mental health, their financial well-being, etc. And so with some of the research that we've been doing over the last year, some of the headline stats that I think have come out, 96% of employers globally told us that the employee experience is more important now than it's ever been. 71% also said that a commitment to employee well-being was now very important. A massive 99% said well-being is now a top priority. Great news for everyone who's involved in this event today. And we also thought through all the benefit schemes that we run, and we run benefits for almost 2 million people around the world at Benefex. All of the top 8 of the top 10 global benefits in every country were all related to well-being. So we're starting to see that actually people are making benefit decisions and reward and recognition and employee value proposition strategies designed around well-being. And I think that's pretty significant. But probably the most impressive stat I think that we came across was that almost 100% of global employees told us that how an organization commits to well-being is now the number one thing they look for when choosing a new role. And I think in the face of the most challenging and hiring environment we've probably ever seen, well-being is clearly where it's at. And I think that's why it's so important for us to not just understand, but also to understand why it's becoming so important for employees and how do we kind of benchmark and measure that. But unfortunately, I think measuring well-being appears to be an almost impossible task. So we know that many people try to do this. I think there are lots of problems with measuring well-being across all of the experiences that I've had at Benefex and outside of Benefex. I've worked with the Rail Safety Standards Board and the Department of Transport on measuring well-being. I've worked with the government-backed Engaged Success on measuring well-being. And I've come to a few key realizations and problems with, I think, the approach that we take in the well-being space. I think primarily most well-being interventions tend to measure their success by taking a snapshot of employees' well-being at a point in time, which I think can work really well for stuff like a mental health app, because it can show you that someone has self-reported well-being is higher after they've used an app or after an intervention has taken place. But that snapshot in time approach, I think, requires a separate data set for every intervention we offer. So whether that's a mental health first aider, a financial well-being or financial education platform, a mindfulness app, and so you end up then with a lot of data points. And I think one of the other problems we've got is most well-being providers see engagement in a well-being tool as a measure of its effectiveness or efficacy, and that's just not true. And I think when I was trying to explain this to my dad one day, this is the kind of quote I came up with was, if you opened a shop and 1,000 people walked through the door but nobody bought anything, is that a successful shop? So why do we think that just because somebody opens up the wellbeing app or logs into a platform, that is somehow good engagement or bad engagement? I think that traditional measure of wellbeing engagement shouldn't really apply to most of the tools in 2023 onwards. I just don't think it tells us anything about the help that somebody received, the behavior they might have changed, or any result of downloading that app or visiting that website. I don't think it really tells us anything other than our comms work probably did a good job to get somebody to that point. And I think another problem we have with measuring well-being is that the evidence behind it is pretty lacking. There are some pretty serious objections remain over the validity of many of the common ways that we measure individual well-being right around the world. There is no universally agreed or coherent framework that currently exists. If we look at government interventions like the ONS annual population survey, that's pretty minimal. I think lacks some important information. And I also think modern measures are pretty rare. So an evaluation study of 42 different instruments that measure employee well-being found that was considerable disagreement regarding how to properly measure well-being across all those different tools. And a separate study I came across looked at 99 different measures of well-being and found that most of those were developed between 1990 and 1999. And clearly the world changed. The world changed a lot in the financial crisis of 2008, and it changed a lot in 2020. And so I think that research is probably too much in its infancy, and I think that's something we should be concerned about. And then probably one of the most obvious ones, and probably a question I get asked most, is how are we defining well-being? We still don't have a clearly defined well-being definition of well-being, and it's also a moving target. People's well-being is worse this year because of the cost of living crisis than it was before the pandemic, and obviously to the pandemic years that was exacerbated as well. And from all the research that I've done, a single standardized definition of well-being doesn't exist in the literature. And I think previous attempts to try and define well-being could argue to be more of a description rather than a definition, as they focus on kind of the dimensions of well-being rather than well-being itself. I think creating a kind of comprehensive list of all the things that directly impact individual well-being will result in pretty significant overlaps and be a long list. We know that, for example, financial well-being affects mental health. If you worry about money, that affects your sleep, and ergo it affects physical well-being. So there's a lot of crossover here. And we know that poor mental health is driven significantly by poor physical well-being. So we know that, walking and physical exercise is one of the biggest prescriptions at the moment for things like depression. And some studies have shown that actually more exercise is going some way to solving the depression problem than medication is. So, significant overlaps between all those different areas. And I think as an industry, the wellbeing industry treats the symptoms of poor wellbeing, not the causes. And this was mentioned already by our last two speakers. We're very reactionary. We're not very proactive when it comes to well-being. So how effective is it to measure some of those things if we aren't actually solving the problem at the root cause? And I think we would be better off trying to ensure that every employer is doing what they can and following the evidence to do the right things and then measure the outputs in the face of those challenges. So when we look at what causes poor well-being at work, again, some of these things have already been mentioned, but exclusion, poor communication, bad management practices, limited autonomy, lack of control, inflexible working, general low levels of employee support, unclear objectives, workload, The physical risk, that again was mentioned, the physical risk of where you might work, bullying, general lack of positive emotions associated with that experience at work, even recognition and reward, then recognizing the contribution people make. All of that kind of really feeds into this, and then stuff outside of that experience. So feelings of justice and economic insecurity, all of those kind of things are at play as well. And so I really think we should be looking at kind of objective measures and subjective measures. And I think typically in a well-being sense, we focus a lot on objective measures. And in a workplace context, the most obvious one of those would be, what are our absence rates? That's a very objective figure. But I think objective measures in well-being have become quite problematic. They tend to examine the kind of observable factors that affect somebody's well-being. So at a high level, this would be, if you've got a job, if you've got a roof over your head, your well-being should be high. But when it comes to real well-being, those traditional objective measures, I don't think they really mean much anymore. As I mentioned, absence rates are generally underreported and commonly inaccurate. So does somebody's level of income really determine their financial well-being? Is the absence of a diagnosed mental health or physical condition telling us that nothing's wrong with that person, or that their well-being is intact? And subjective measures of well-being are starting to be championed by many experts as one of the best ways to measure well-being, including an extensive report by the OECD in 2013 and championed by the National Research Council a few years later. And I think we can also see subjective measures being used increasingly by economists. And subjective well-being comes from this, psychologists call this hedonic tradition, and includes things like, how satisfied am I with my life? And so I start to see that I think subjective measures are one of the best ways for us to measure well-being. And more broadly in society, we're seeing that advances in the measurement of subjective well-being are now pretty profoundly influencing the social sciences and policy analysis. And even some subjective measures of well-being are now becoming kind of key outcome programs in evaluation research by economists. So economists are thinking somebody's objective view of their life, asking somebody how satisfied they are with their life, is more important than asking them, are you married? Do you have kids? How much of your money do you work? All that kind of stuff. It's more to do with how do people feel. And I think the good news for anyone listening today is, as an employer, you're probably already measuring the subjective well-being of your people in one way or another. And I think it's important because we take as the starting point this idea that people have preferences over fundamental aspects of their own well-being. And this is all grounded in an economic principle of something called revealed preference, which holds the idea that a person's informed choice is the best criteria for judging what increases their welfare. So asking employees how they feel is arguably a better measure of well-being than some of those subjective measures. And for the sake of time, I'll skip through a few of these things, but generally what that means is we're trying to look at how people experience their lives, not the objective facts of their lives. So workplace well-being, I think, has become such an important part of people's lives that it's almost an index of societal progress. And so I think ensuring that employers are following the evidence, ticking off what we know is effective in the workplace and what can be measured and what is influenced by well-being at work. It's almost akin to finding out why cars are crashing in the first place, rather than just pulling our people from the wreckage, which I think our industry does a lot. Is we deal with people in crisis and don't really think about how do people get to that crisis. But it also makes clear that an employer's kind of sphere of influence when it comes to well-being is pretty limited. Poor well-being can be caused by a complex set of changing things, many of which are out of the employer's control. So shouldn't we be focusing on the areas where an employer can influence and positively progress? And I think getting this right makes work support people where it can, and it draws this line of responsibility and kind of paternalism. And in many cases, I think it can make the workplace a positive force in people's lives. So something we've done at Benefex to try and deal with that is we've created a tool called the Wellbeing Progress Index. And so effectively, this is a tool that will measure well-being within an organization, but it will take employer actions, not individual well-being. So if you follow the evidence, and we've got about 600 data points of all the things an employer should be doing, if you do more of those things, you're more likely to get that positive result out the back end. And so some really quick examples of how we've been able to do that with our customers. So we know that if those people who have workplace private medical insurance are statistically less likely to suffer poor mental health. So not having private health insurance is actually a risk factor for poor mental health in the workplace. We know that if your communications with your employees are inadequate, that drives workplace stress. So you should be making sure that the way you communicate is transparent and honest and frequent. We know that the use of recognition tools can correlate with life satisfaction and motivation. A father that is accurately and adequately recognized for the effort they put in work has a better relationship with their family at home. So it's really important that we see what are these things that employers can change that will start to improve the well-being of their people. And so effectively what that tool allows our customers to do, and anyone else who wants to use it, because it's free, any of you can request a link from us and use that, is you can benchmark your approach to employee well-being. It's backed by evidence. It takes a very solid evidence view. It's holistic, so it covers all these different things that touches well-being, not just the kind of core well-being things we all might be used to. It can track your progress, and most importantly, it tells you what you need to do. So what the areas that you're kind of falling behind for. And all the evidence behind that tool is summarized in my book. So Matt mentioned that briefly at the start, so thank you for that. But a work in progress is available to buy on Amazon around the world. And that kind of summarizes all the evidence behind the index and why we think these subjective measures are so important. And if you want to download any of that research, you can do so at hellobenefx.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gavin. Great, amazing talk. And again, more questions have come to mind. So for those watching right now, if you have any questions, please just put them into the comments and we'll ask them to the panel. And if we're able to bring back Joe and Anna as well, thank you and welcome back. I suppose just a lot in that 35 minutes from all three of you. I suppose just wanted to put it out there to Joe first, and then Anna, and then round to Gethin in the order of you spoke. But is there still a stigma around mental ill health? And if so, how big is it versus pre-COVID?
Anecdotally, I would say that the stigma is less now than pre-COVID. I don't think it's rife, but it's still there in pockets. And I think what's probably important is that if somebody is, has a negative take on this type of thing, if they are a line manager or have a prominent personality in a team, then I can see how younger or newer members of the team might be reticent to put their hand up. So I don't think it's widespread, but where it happens, where you've got these little pockets, it will impact a group of people in that, because we all get like those micro cultures in teams. That's where I think it can be dangerous.
And a quick follow-up, purely around what you're doing now, because it sounds like you've made incredible progress in a relatively short space of time. And if you go back a decade or pre-COVID, do you think you'd be making that kind of progress throughout the organization, getting the ears of the people and people actually paying attention to these issues as quickly as you seem to be getting now? Just anecdotally again.
I would doubt it. No,
Okay.
Because it just wasn't where we were at as a society. I don't think people saw that it influenced business KPIs or organisational performance. I don't think there was any of that level of understanding and awareness, in the past. So no, I don't. I'd have probably been seen as a bit out there, like yoga and doing my meditation and one of them.
Okay, thank you. I was writing one other question down for follow-up for everybody at the end. Anna, over to you. Is there still a stigma? If so, has it increased, reduced in the past 5 years?
No, I think I completely agree with Joe. I think it's a lot less now. I think COVID is obviously there's a silver lining in COVID, and that is that it's much more the norm to talk about the person and not just about the performance. I think, if I'm honest, from looking at companies that we work with during COVID, everything, if you think about the one-to-ones and the conversations and everything that OpenBlend does, it was very much about the person. So let's talk about motivation, let's talk about well-being, let's get people talking about that. And actually, in our customers, which are very forward-thinking, very people-led organisations, I think they're thinking, right, okay, now we need to perform. We're a business, we need to perform. So they've put a lot of push around kind of reducing that stigma, and now they want to kind of take their foot off that a bit and put their foot down on the performance. So it's that kind of, I would see it almost like a Venn diagram. How you've got the actually McKinsey have just released a report on it, and I've always spoken about this Venn diagram, and it's on the second page of this massive report they've done. It's called People Plus Performance, and it's about the kind of the crossover of pushing performance and pushing people. But even that, you know, McKinsey's bringing out a report saying, so yes, the stigma's gone. It's a workplace thing. Certain businesses have to catch up, but I do still think it's tough for businesses to get the balance right. Well, businesses, managers, and individuals, all the way down the chain. Yeah. And
thank you. And to preface your answer, Gethin, I suppose 92% of employees saying it's a need almost put the power of that, even if there was a stigma. And obviously that was well-being as a whole, not just the mental ill health piece, but businesses can't make it a stigma. They have to face this front on now, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason why that figure's so high, and it matches some other studies around the world, which is why people want more well-being at work, is for those privileged people that have got a roof over their head and food in their bellies. We're being squeezed further, right? The cost of living crisis is an example of that. So people's well-being at a higher level, it's not the well-being we expected. We're not living the lives we expected. Things are costing more, people are more stressed, and social media and all this kind of stuff kind of all comes together to make it worse. So that's part of it. And the state in many countries is not supporting in the way that it used to. So people have got fewer people to turn to for support. But I think the stigma issue is really interesting. I have a theory that we are talking about mental health too much. I think we are risking normalizing it to the extent that everyone goes through it. As we saw through the pandemic, the amount of men that wouldn't ask for help but had experienced poor mental health for the first time was pretty significant. And the reason why people didn't ask for help is their view was, well, everyone's going through it, so I'm not special. There's probably people who've got it worse than I am, and they probably need the care. And we saw that with the NHS in the UK, where people didn't go to the hospital because they were like, I'll leave that for the people that need it. Yeah. And you're benchmarking yourself against the next person, having no idea how much that support that person needs, and whether yours is actually more than them. Yeah. And so I wonder whether we get to the point where everyone's got poor mental health, so you're no special. And I do think I haven't really given it much thought, but I think there might be an issue there with us normalizing it too much.
Well, that's is it okay if we run over for 5 minutes? Have you got time, or do you need to be places? Is that okay? Thank you. And a very interesting point, and one I think we'd love to explore in an article or something. Especially
Sorry, Matt, just to interrupt, I'll be 30 seconds. Also, don't forget as well, mental health. I don't want to use the word fits, but I think it's been assisted by people's organisations' commitment to diversity and inclusion as well. There's this lots of talk about bringing your whole self to work and things like that, and mental health would fall into that as well. So I think that has helped with stigma.
No, it's well, I think we talk about things overlapping. One thing impacts another, whether it be sleep, that financial worries then impacts your sleep. The same with well-being and culture and inclusion; they all overlap. It feeds into the same piece almost. So a couple other questions. I think just quite kind of important points really. During Anna's talk, you're talking around 25% in increase in anxiety, and I suppose I just wanted to ask everybody's opinion, because anxiety and burnout just roll off the tongue now. It's just almost like a flippant reference to something, and you are the experts. Like how much of a negative impact does anxiety and burnout have on an individual and the business if it's a serious problem? For those that don't know, just reading about it all the time, but haven't gone through it themselves.
I mean, I think that
anybody can take that.
I think that links on a little bit to what I was just talking about, where you've normalized it so much. We all get anxious, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of how many talks I do, I get a little bit anxious before they start. So that's temporary, and that doesn't require any assistance from anyone else. just kind of go through that. And the same as I have days where I feel pretty rubbish about myself, and I feel depressive, but I'm not depressed. I feel anxious, but I'm not. I don't have anxiety, and I think we are interchanging that quite a lot. There are people who are saying like, I have a really anxious day. I need a day at home. We're like, we're just anxious. You don't have anxiety. Yeah. And I think that's part of the challenge we've got with normalizing it too much, that we blur the lines between a temporary feeling and a serious diagnosable condition.
So putting the support where it really needs to go.
And I think maybe there needs to be more chat around an optimum level of something, because as Gethin said, like that, it's actually good that you're a bit anxious before doing a presentation, because you're getting your adrenaline pumping, you care about what you're about to do, how you're going to come across, and that's a really good thing. So I think it's about maybe supporting people to become self-aware around what an optimum level of something is, which is why I think, having a manager, whether it be a manager, a friend, or someone who you can kind of bounce that off and say, right, well, what would be an optimum level of you, and let's work towards getting to that level. So, my background's coaching. It's always about moving towards something, not moving. There's always a solution to something. So if you're feeling like this, what do you need to do to get yourself in a better place? I think sometimes people it's becoming like a label, and you just wear that label, and then it's in labeling is a thing in coaching where you start behaving what the label is in a way that the behavior is. So helping people come out of that and saying, there's an optimum level of it, and where do you want to get to, and let's channel that.
Thank you.
And can I just to go on to both of those, the staff survey that I was talking about that happened in my organisation pre-me, thank God, one of the questions was, do you experience work-related stress? I mean, I'd love to speak to the 13% that said 13% said no. I mean, like, the absurdity of it, Thanks for that. Great data.
Those 13% are lucky rather than unlucky. So thank you so much. And this could be a whole power hour in itself. So I know I'm opening up a big topic here, but again, based upon what came out of all three sessions, but around specifically, I suppose, conversations and more human one-on-one time. The men maybe think that one of the benefits of AI is to be said that work can become more human, which seems to be also oxymoronic in some ways. So, and there's obviously, I've got nieces and nephews who have Snapchat, and there's a chat AI function that's just come up on there where they're actually just having a conversation that would probably be 30 years ago be an imaginary friend, but it's a computer. And then chatbots at work where people will be having conversations, checking in on them. And I just wonder, is AI going to be a good thing for well-being? Are chatbots disingenuous? What's your overall view on it? Where we are, the potential of AI with regards to helping people and their well-being at work? And again, anybody who wants to go.
So actually, I've got my CTO and Chief Revenue Officer are on a call another call at the moment on Chat GPT in HR tech. It's a specialist kind of thing on that. So I'm hoping there's a recording of it so I can watch it. So we're having quite a few conversations around this at the moment, because I think I mentioned when I was it's really, so I've had to self-challenge using technology to facilitate conversation. Okay, because that's what Open Blend does, when actually technology primarily is there to reduce the need to talk, whereas Open Blend is technology to promote conversation and good conversation. Yeah. And I feel the same dichotomy with AI. So actually, where we're looking at AI is in enabling people to prepare for those conversations. So how do I have a conversation? So you could put in some search words and it could bring up information. So you're going into a conversation with someone who is experiencing this. It can feed content to a manager so they could read that to prepare themselves to go in and have the conversation. But I personally, obviously I'm going to say this, I'm a coach. I think the thought of that absolutely terrifies me. I'm not saying there's not a place for it. Yeah. In addition to human conversations, but if we can use AI, Chat GPT, and everyone's talking about it at the moment, to support better conversations, that's awesome. The thought of it replacing human conversation is terrifying, I think.
Okay. Anybody else got any thoughts on that?
So I did my first talk on AI and well-being in about 2016, 2015, and you've got to draw a line between kind of large language processing models like ChatGPT and the rest of AI. I think when you look, and I think at the time I had a meeting with a psychiatrist just to ask about how much of their first meeting could be replaced by a chatbot. So there's kind of, so anyone who's got counselling, you might get it in coaching as well, Anna, where you kind of there might be a set few questions you probably ask to explore that conversation. And I was coming up with the idea of could somebody start to kind of have that conversation before you pass it off to a human, and the human then can start off knowing exactly what the issue might be or whatever. But
like a triage kind of thing,
exactly, and get you to the right help quicker. If you look at AI's more general applications, I think healthcare is where it's going to be seen the most. I think we've got some recent studies that show its ability to diagnose conditions faster and more accurately than a human at the moment is pretty significant. Going back to the talk I did in 2016, there were models being used in Copenhagen where AI would answer 999 calls, or whatever the equivalent is in Denmark. They would answer 999 calls and be able to diagnose somebody having a cardiac arrest about 30 seconds quicker than a human could. And obviously, if you're having a cardiac arrest, that 30 seconds is pretty significant.
Yeah.
And I think that piece of tech was called Orb or something like that. So people have been looking at it for a while. And I think, getting the knowledge of all the best doctors in the world and anything they've ever seen and every symptom and putting that into a machine that says, if you tick these 3 boxes, it's probably one of these 3 diseases. There's loads of data that says we've been able to diagnose conditions 30 days faster than a human would have because of the paperwork they would have had to read through. So I think there's, in the well-being sense, there's a lot, but I would add to Anna's talks about caution with how we use AI in other places. And obviously when you're looking at well-being, even more caution.
I guess, I just quickly go back on that, and that's stunning. And who's to say that's not a good thing to help diagnose heart attacks quicker? I guess I just have this image of, is it Wall-E when the man's in the chair? And
oh my God, I know.
And I think if it just, I think like everything in life is a balance, isn't there? So I think just having a chatbot to talk to, wrong, but actually doing that pre-diagnosis piece or setting up a more productive call or conversation, so you don't spend the first half an hour there, but you actually spend an hour in the really good stuff. But fully one way or another seems to, or balance is the best way forward for me, and I worry that we'll lose that. But Joe, you must have some thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit old-fashioned, because what I've seen in my life is that as technology has improved and improved and improved, and you can't dispute what Gethin's just said, just like you can't dispute all the other things that it's enabled us to do. But at exactly the same time, we've seen the mental health of the world deteriorating in this frenetic and frenzied pace of life because of technology. And that's just my observation. I've not read that anywhere. I can't quantify it. It's just how I feel. I just observe this frenzied, frenetic life in the workplace. I started in the workplace in 1990. We worked hard, but there were no computers, no phones. There was none of this, and it just wasn't as frenetic. It just wasn't. It was different. So it concerns me. It can improve things like diagnosis, but I don't see it making us happier.
I feel having had this conversation, I'm so again thankful for your time and your expertise. When we went through COVID, it was the people within the organisations that were dealing with the social justice issues, that were dealing with just people surviving on a day-to-day basis, and where governments may have failed us or leaders weren't there. It was people at work that were looking out for each other that actually kind of set the standard. And I almost feel that it will be people like yourself and others around the world who will be kind of that filter, because I don't see, again, the adults in the room around this stuff. But I think bringing it into the workplace and actually getting the right use of it and finding that balance will probably come down to the people who are helping and focusing on that people experience within the workplace again. So good luck to everybody. But it just shows you how important everybody is on this call and in the community, really, because they at the forefront of all this change in society.
That's exciting.
Well, look, again, I appreciate the extra 10 minutes. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
No, thank you very much for having us.
Okay. Well, I'm
Anyone
just very
can reach
grateful again,
out.
and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure you agree, Gethin, Anna and Joe were sensational, and we'll be making this video on demand if you're not already watching it on demand. And the next Power Hour is on culture on May the 24th. We then also have our summer series returning for its third year, starting on June the 26th. A 20-minute session every single day through to mid-July. It's basically a keynote every day for 25 minutes, bringing you different topics across different sessions on various different topics across the spectrum of the world of work. Our Inspirathon is in October, the 24-hour non-stop event with 70 speakers. And we'll be announcing our top 50 inspiring workplaces in EMEA, North America, Australasia in the next 3 months, in May, June and July. So watch out for those organizations, the case studies and the work that will come subsequently after that. But for now, thank you very much. Thank you for staying with us and see you soon. Take care.